find little pieces that say, oh, if you create this MMS, the CFG, obvious name, in a very specific location on your file system, then we will observe whatever is configured in there. Also, Flash doesn't have any proof of origin, like you can't sign Swift files. There is a likely exception with DRM, but we're not concerned about DRM here. So what types of vulnerabilities are we looking at when we look at Flash? Like, what do we actually have to fix? Well, you have a bunch of them if you go to, for example, Security Focus and lists like everything Flash player. And if you look at it, it says like, oh, you can arbitrarily copy data from the clipboard or to the clipboard of the user, or you have an integer overflow here, or you have the 2007 marked out bug, which is the integer signedness issue in their scene counter, which they have for 10 versions. It never would ever someone try to actually put a large integer in that field. So in 2007, Marked Out wrote this excellent paper and exploit on this. If you haven't checked it out, it's definitely worth a read. Nowadays, lately, those days, we have a couple of unspecified memory corruptions, which every unspecified memory corruption I ever heard of could be turned into an exploit. And in 2008, for example, we had a version null pointer dereference, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And I checked out the exploit, and you don't actually have to be able to code ActionScript to see that this is not a lot of code. And calling load twice shouldn't actually cause a null pointer dereference in a virtual machine. So what attacks are we seeing? Apart from obviously popping the player and straight executing code on your machine, Flash could be used in the past for DNS rate binding attacks. Dan made that happen. You actually see a shitload of Flash files that are used as exploit carriers. So since Flash has so many information about the versions of different parts of your operating system, like what operating system version down to the build number you're running, what browser down to the build number, what Flash version down to the build number, all that type of stuff, you actually see exploits that figure all this out and then grab the right exploit of a web server and execute it. You also see clickjacking, so the Flash actually overlays your UI, and then if you click on something, you actually clicked in a Flash file. We have seen a lot of cases with additional HTTP headers. So there was a very famous exploit that uses a CSRF vulnerability in a home router, like the little plastic boxes, that was largely shipped in, I think it was Mexico, Brazil or something. And so they had this banner ad that they placed on all the Brazilian files, and then like everyone who surfed to the website actually owned his own router. The same works with UPnP. You can generate UPnP from Flash, and then whoever surfs to the website after that had a port forwarding through his NAT in the home router. The most common thing that we actually see is so trivial it hurts. It actually like takes the browser and sends it to a new URL. So, and that also tells us what type of malware we are seeing. So the class 1 is actually the redirectors and downloaders. They just point the browser from whatever website the Flash was loaded from to a URL that ends in .exe. And as by the same theory of why spam is still around, if a large enough percentage of the people just clicks on open, they're good. So this is the most common thing you see. You also see binary exploits that target the runtime. That's usually based on Markdown's work, actually. Or you see the attack vehicle thing. So you have a cross-site scripting in a website, and the cross-site scripting by itself doesn't get you anywhere. But if you can make it look like your Swift file came from this website, then you can actually do a lot more shit. And so this is what people do. Examples, the most commonly seen malware, and that's also what hit Heise and eWeek and others, is something called Gnida. And it's a malicious banner ad that actually, it is actually not really malware. It's a piece of Flash code that checks with your local Flash cookies whether you have been part of the scam before or not. and uses different timings to execute clicks on other advertisement campaigns or download stuff to you. The other one is the 2007-0071 exploit, where we see countless variations of. And then you have the really easy downloader Trojans that just try to like hide what they're actually downloading, but don't do anything interesting. They're still annoying though. Now here's the interesting thing. Before we go into Flash details, let me tell you that like most of the Flash files internally are compressed with zlib. No voodoo, it is straight zlib. Now you take a couple of malware examples, I took 3, and load it up to virustotal.com, which runs through a shitload of virus scanners and tells you whether they detect anything. So you take a generic downloader, you fire it up, 18 out of 41 AVs actually detect this. The generic downloader has 2 instructions for the virtual machine. So it's not like the most complex piece of malware you've ever seen. Still, you got like 43% detection rate, or 44. You take the same file, you uncompress it, so it's still a valid Flash file, it's no longer packed, that's all, and it actually drops to 16. Now, you take the most common piece of malware in the whole Flash world and do the same exercise, 29 out of 41 detected, you decompress it, 8 out of 40 detect the most common piece of Flash malware. Turns out they're obviously really matching on the packed string, like the string that came out of zlib when it was compressed. So let's put it this way, the AV companies are not going to be much help in protecting against Flash exploits. So how do they look in the inside? Better. So, how does Flash look in the inside? The Flash file is also called movies, which is kind of like fitting, but I don't like it too much. Follow a specification called SWF, or apparently pronounced SWF. Version 3 to 10 are specified, and I'm going to bore you with the whole history of this specification. They can be compressed, as I mentioned. They generally follow a TLV structure. Like everyone who has seen binary file formats knows that, or protocols. It's like type, length, value, and then you have a container object, which may contain other container objects. They call those things tags, well, at least the upper level. There are 63 of those tag types. And what's really important to know about Flash is everything is heavily version dependent. Like you take the same data structure, you take version 4 and version 5, the data structure looks different, the data types look different. So everything is massively version dependent. So what's actually executing code in Flash is what's called the Adobe virtual machines. And here's the first big surprise, at least it was for me. It actually contains 2 virtual machines. Like securing one would be so easy for Adobe. So AVM1, like the first virtual machine, is a historically grown thing that is programmed in something that Adobe calls ActionScript version 1 and 2. And according to a data set from Fukami, about like 80 to 90% of all the Flash in the world that you find on the internet is actually AVM1. That includes YouTube, YouPorn, and everything else you would care about. AVM2 is an ECMAScript engine. Like, it's very close to JavaScript, but it wouldn't be Adobe if they hadn't changed the specifications on several parts to make it more strange or whatever. It's programmed in something that's called ActionScript 3, not very surprisingly, closely resembling JavaScript, but then closely resembling. And the interesting thing is that theoretically that was a smart move. Practically, the whole clicky bunty, pixel pusher, RGB, Casper community has a real issue understanding OOP. And if you ever opened the native Adobe development environment for Flash, you understand why. Like, This is all built for ActionScript 1 and 2. If you actually